All right, welcome back to the Prepare Like a Pro live chat show. My name is Jack McLean. I'm the host, and tonight my guest is Steven Allan. He is the sports physiotherapist at the West Coast Eagles in the Australian Rules Football League. Steve has recently finished working at the Hockey Australia women's team and worked at Melbourne Football Club for 5 seasons. He runs workshops at a private practice called the West Coast in Health and Performance. And before we start tonight's episode, our mission here at Prepare Like a Pro is to empower aspiring athletes and staff with practical knowledge from some of the industry's most inspiring individuals and to strengthen the AFL community. If you like the show, please show your support by following us on Instagram and subscribing to the podcast. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Welcome, Steve. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Thank you, Jack. Thanks for having me.
I'm looking forward to this chat. We'll dive straight into the very beginning of your career, mate. What age did you discover you had a passion for being a physio, and did you know that you wanted to work in elite sport straight away, or was it another population that you were interested in at the time?
Yeah, it's probably a common thread to people in our industry that as a young kid, I thought I was probably going to play Test cricket and AFL footy and go to the Olympics as a swimmer if I wanted to. And probably as I started to get a bit older and I realised you had to be good enough at any of those things to make it to that level. And I realised I probably wasn't going to make it there. That the next best thing, you know, at that time, watching on TV, you'd see the physio run out there or be part of it. So I thought that's what I wanted to do, mainly from just the sports fan perspective rather than, you know, being really medically driven or anything along those lines. And then sort of as I went through my physio degree, it probably branched lots of different ways as you learn more about the human body and the physiology and the pathologies that you can get. And I wasn't really too fussed where I went with it. But as then I got towards the end of the degree, I kind of went full circle and went back to wanting to be involved in sports physio. Yeah.
And along that journey, when you were starting to look at different career paths, who were some strong influences to help forge the way?
Yeah, I've been lucky to have a lot of good mentors really over my time, all the way up until today. Probably one that springs to mind, I was really lucky in my first job. I remember I graduated, I think it was 20th or 23rd of December, something like that, in 2007. And then 2 days for Christmas. And then I started 27th of December at work at a clinic with Ben Raysmith, who is now one of the probably world leaders in sports physio as I'm not sure of his official title, but he's been to 2 or 3 Olympic Games, 2 or 3 Commonwealth Games with Athletics Australia, and he's got quite a senior role with athletics. And so I was just lucky that I got a job at his clinic when he was relatively young as well. And, you know, he was working as the head physio as one of the waffle clubs, East Fremantle down Freo Way. So, yeah, and I just stayed in touch with him all along. And then he did his sports physio through La Trobe Uni, sort of as we were working together. And then he got a job at the AIS, and he spent 10 or 11 years at the AIS, and he's just recently moved back to Perth. So from a physio point of view, he'd probably be, you know, a mentor or someone that I still keep in touch with all the time, and I still see all the time, and there's a bit of a guru in his field. And there's lots of others that I've kind of worked with along the way. Dave Misson at Melbourne Footy Club, who's the high performance manager there. Sam Peach and Joel Ames, they were the other physios in my time at Melbourne. Chris Perkin, who I work with in the West Coast Health private practice over here, and probably Dave Valley as well, who is a strength and conditioning coach who I spent the last couple of years with working at hockey, and we forged a really good relationship there. So there'd be a couple that spring to mind off the top of my head.
Yeah, and with Ben, what stood out when you guys were working together early days? Like, it sounds like it was something that you recognised he was going to be pretty successful, and he was driven. What did you know what did you notice early on in his career?
Well, probably more so than anything was the way he could deal with people. So he was booked out every day, and he'd run an hour late, hour and a half late. He's one of those kind of practitioners, and he didn't get stressed, and it didn't really bother him. So he kind of said, well, this is the way I am, and if people don't like it, they won't see me, and that's okay. But the people that do want to see me will see me because they like the way that I operate.
Yep.
So it was probably his care for people and how he dealt with people that stood out to me more so than, any fancy tricks he had clinically, or, he's got lots of those and he's got great knowledge, don't get me wrong. But I think what sets him apart from my end is, that care and the time that he takes to get to know people, to get the best out of them.
Yeah, yeah. And when did you discover that sport was something that you wanted to work in and start getting involved in elite sporting clubs?
Yeah, so I always had a
passion.
Yeah, that I've played a lot of sport myself as I was growing up, and even through those uni years, I was playing cricket and footy at sort of local level. And probably as I'd finished my degree and then started working with Ben at the Waffle Club down the road, I thought I really love this, and it's something that I wanted to pursue. But I still wanted to do other things as well with my life. So travel was one of them, and through playing cricket, I suppose lucky enough that you can go over to England and play cricket. So I made sure that I wasn't just sort of a workaholic. I wanted to kind of tick those boxes first. So, I did my undergrad degree and then did a couple of years working with Ben, and so I could make some money. And then by that stage, I knew that I wasn't going to play elite sport like I was talking about before. So I thought, well, what do I want to get out of my cricket career? And that was to go over to England to play. So I went over there for 2 summers, and essentially really lucky that everything's paid for over there. You get accommodation, flights, a few pounds a week of spending money. The level's pretty low over there, so you don't have to train. So I kind of ticked that box of travel by traveling all through Europe during the week and coming back on the weekends to England to play cricket. So I did that. And then once I'd got that out of my system and had my fun, when I was sort of 24 or 25, moved back to Perth and did my postgrad study through La Trobe. And that's when I kind of decided, right, I want to get a job in elite sport. And at that time, I didn't quite have the CV, which I don't regret, because I wanted to tick that travel bug. So I didn't want to go straight to postgrad study and sport straight away and never have a break. So I did that. And then, once I got back to Perth, I spent the next 2 years really knuckling down, which was tough, where you're studying full-time, basically, and working full-time, basically, at 2 different jobs. And so I just thought I'd knuckle down for those 2 years, and then I could hopefully set myself up moving forward.
That's awesome, mate. Thanks for sharing that. It will resonate, I'm sure, with some physios and strength and conditioning coaches that are on that path, and they've just, like you said, most of us do start by playing, and then have a bit of a reality check that it's pretty bloody tough to be the best in the world at but the next best thing is helping those athletes that do have the skill set and all that, and helping them along their journey. And you mentioned the importance of listening to yourself and listening to what you want to do by not just continuing down the career path at an early age, but also listening to the personal side and personal development and the fun that you can get out of traveling and still playing sport. Was that something that you just listened to your gut when you're making that decision, sort of a crossroads decision, or did some peers help you with that, family, mentors like Ben, or did you just sort of listen to your gut and went with the flow, so to speak?
Yeah, listen to my gut. I always knew that travel was something that I wanted to do. and I knew really that cricket was probably that pathway that I'd be able to take,
Yep.
Which is pretty unique, really. You don't have to be, a test cricketer to be able to go and do that. So I was lucky that I played cricket, and I knew I wanted to tick that box. But by the same token, probably by the way that my parents had raised me, I suppose, is that I knew that you couldn't live that lifestyle forever. So I knew then there would be a time that I'd want to settle down. So to answer your question, it's probably more myself. I kind of knew that I wanted to go down that pathway.
Yeah, and then coming back, it sounded like you put yourself out there and tried to apply for some jobs and realized how competitive the industry was, and then you started this focus of, okay, I'm not going to knuckle down now and get to work and almost play a bit of catch up. Take
Yep.
us through. Was there a 3-year plan, a 2-year plan, a 1-year plan, or was it simply just getting to hard work and speaking to those about who have sort of left clues through success of getting into sport?
Yep.
Take us through how your mindset when you came back and what type of work you were doing as well.
Yeah. So the mindset was definitely hard work, and realistically at that time, which was about 2011, 12 kind of period, you probably weren't going to get a job in elite level sport without having done your postgrad sports physiotherapy. So that was probably my main driver, was to get that box ticked over that 2-year period.
Mm-hmm.
And whilst I was doing that, when I mentioned before, I was working 2 jobs. So I was working part-time in a private practice in Fremantle, and then at nights I was the head physio for East Perth Footy Club,
Yep.
which is in the Waffle. And at that time they were the Eagles reserves side.
Mm-hmm.
So I was lucky really that when I got back from England, their previous head physio had got a job at North Melbourne Footy Club, and I'd worked with him in the clinic in Fremantle. So I kind of fell into that job really, and they happened to be aligned with the Eagles, which kind of then got me exposed to that higher level sport, where I would come into the Eagles once a week really as part of my prac work that I was doing through Latrobe. And so I was kind of exposed that way.
Yeah.
But then I was still running the show, so to speak, at a lower level where you could make your own mistakes and learn how to organise a program and speak to doctors and surgeons and organise all that sort of stuff. And then in the private side of it, some of that was chronic pain. So it really made me, even though I didn't particularly enjoy it, because it's really, anyone who's worked in chronic pain would know it can be tiring and difficult, but I'm glad looking back that I did it, because it made me a far better practitioner. So that's how I kind of spent those couple of years. It was very busy.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
There's plenty of hats going on there, but all great things to develop your craft. The day that you spent it in the West Coast program, take us through sort of how did you, like, what would be a typical day? Was it more fly on the wall stuff? Was it assisting with rehab? Were there some roles and responsibilities that you had, or was it more just sort of case by case depending on what was going on in the day?
Yeah, there were no real responsibilities. That they had a great program back then, and they still do today, which I've just started at. But they had a great program back then. So it was part of it was there for them to help me really be a bit of a fly on the wall on Mondays. So, to summarise it, I suppose, for you, keep it relatively brief, their players in the reserves would play at East Perth with me on the weekend. I'd do a bit of a handover back to the Eagles medical staff, after that on the Saturday night. And then I'd come in on the Monday and kind of watch them, the doctors, physios, assess what they thought about the injury, I suppose. And then I'd help out, like a lot of prac students do, whether it's S&C or physio, whether it's strapping ankles in a physio sense, or helping with the screening, or being an extra in a rehab drill, or those kind of things. So they were really good at accommodating me and trying to help me, but by the same token, I wasn't working there, or I didn't have any decision-making kind of capabilities.
Yeah. And through that experience, if you didn't have it, like how much were you gaining from seeing that environment and seeing
Yeah,
the top end do it?
I think it's a great question, because for younger practitioners out there, you can go one of two ways, and it's probably, in my opinion, now that I've been through that pathway, you don't want to get stuck kind of being a fly on the wall and in a professional sport, because I think you probably gain a bit more out of the lower level, whether it's amateur or sub-elite, because you're running the show there. You're making your own mistakes, and like I said earlier, you're the one organising the scans or speaking to the surgeons or going into the surgery, liaising with the S&C. You've got skin in the game, I'd call it. So I would probably recommend that a bit more than simply being at a professional sport and doing the menial tasks. And there's definitely a role for that if you're doing both, though. So what I got out of it was great, because I could see everything that they would do at that level. But I think if you get stuck down that pathway, it's probably not as good for you, where you're just watching and you're not actually doing.
Yeah,
That's my opinion.
The ceiling of your development is a little bit lower than when you're constantly being challenged through making decisions.
Yeah. But I think in a perfect world, which is really difficult to do, a combination of both is great. So you get to see a bit of what happens at the elite level, and then, you get to run your own show at the lower level.
Both are critical, and then like you said, being able to implement that into a semi-professional environment, it can be a challenge, because you're not having the same time and access to the players.
That's right.
That head physio role, how was that going into sort of a leadership type of position, coming back into the country and then stepping into that? How did you find it from a, management point of view?
Yeah, I really loved it. It's something that I probably still aspire to. I'm doing a sports management degree as well at the moment through Deakin, so it's always something that I've aspired to. And looking back now, I'm sure I made lots of mistakes doing it, but it just gave me the opportunity to be in the deep end a bit, and then get exposed to other practitioners, I suppose, that you wouldn't otherwise be exposed to. And then also learning how to, I suppose, programming is one thing in a practitioner or clinical sense, but then also programming from a wider perspective of, how does this week look, when we know that 3/4 of the squad have been digging holes at work, because it's been most of them are tradies, and for whatever reason the building's taken off or whatever. Like, sort of analysing things from that bigger perspective and chatting about that with coaches is probably what I found most beneficial.
Yep. And how much has the performance medical team changed since then, from a practitioner team point of view?
At the Eagles, or
at sort of at state league level, and then also at Eagles when you were spending a day there. How different is it to now that you're?
Well, I think at the state league level, it probably hasn't changed that much, because realistically, funding never changes at that level, that they can spend on people like physios and S&C staff. So they have a lot of students working there. And I've just started again, just started at the Eagles. So, like I said a bit before, it, like most clubs or organisations in general, took a bit of a downturn through COVID, and a lot of people had either lost their jobs or had smaller roles, where hopefully the industry of sport in general, not just football, is starting to come out of that now, where it's still not what it was in 2018 or 17 when it was getting really big. But for example, we've now got 3 physios again, where for the previous few years there's only been 2. The S&C staff had kind of been spread a bit more thinly in roles between the men's and the women's programs, where it's starting to move back more now to where you can have roles with just the men or just the women. So, yeah, hopefully we're sort of getting back to normal, or to what it was in 17 and 18, 19. But I think it'll probably still take another couple of years to get right back there.
Yeah, and you mentioned like the referral into the I think it was East Fremantle where you got that head physio role. For those physios listening that are working in a clinic, what did you do anything particularly deliberate to showcase your skill sets to other physios, or was it just the fact that you had a busy practice? Do you think that you had respect from that physio and have trust from that physio that he referred you to the program, or did you do things outside of the clinic to sort of forge a relationship?
Yeah.
Take us through
So,
it for physios that are working in the clinic but are finding it challenging to get a foot in the door at a club.
Yeah.
What are some ways that you can?
So, well, how I did it, I was lucky again. So when I got back from England at that time, that I was kind of the only person in Perth that had some footy experience and wanted it. So, yeah, I got back, and my experience up until then with Ben at East Fremantle had been I was the Colts physio and he was the senior physio. And then as he kind of was doing his postgrad study, we kind of shared the senior role a bit at East Freo. He was still definitely above me, but I was working with the senior squad and we kind of shared it 50-50. And then, another younger physio started doing the Colts. So when I moved back, I'd had that experience of a couple of years. And I should say as well, when I was here over summers in Australia, I still went down to the footy club over summer and did pre-season with East Fremantle. So I think I had 4 or 5 years there in total. So I was never totally out of it, and I was still kind of part of the club, I suppose. But then, when I got back and that role at East Perth came up, it kind of just fit that I was probably suitably qualified for that job at that stage, and it all just fell into place timing-wise.
Yeah, fantastic. Really sound advice. Like you've got to, like you said, timing. That's where the luck comes in. But you created the opportunity through experience and hard work. And doing good work. So that's awesome. So outside of the experience side of things and the knowledge that we've covered, that you've worked on throughout your career, what are some other ways outside of the traditional ways with degree and working in elite sport that you do to sort of grow as a practitioner?
Good question. Probably listen is the number one thing, whether that's literally listening to podcasts like this, or chatting to other people that are experts in the field. That's probably would be some main advice that I'd have. You need to read your research papers. You need to go to your courses. I think that's probably a given that everybody does. But I think you can get so much more information. Like I said in the Ben Raysmith example earlier on to your first question, of just even watching how people do the things you can't teach. I find that that's the way I learn anyway. I get a lot out of that, of just, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I could maybe apply that to my clinical practice, or watch that. Why are you doing that? Because of this article, then go and read it. I find that's how I work a bit better than sort of aimlessly reading stats for the sake of it, because you think you're doing the right thing. Listen and watch, and then do my own research from there.
And so it's quite transferable or deliberate to an issue that's going on in your workplace.
Spot on.
No, awesome, mate. That's great. It's sound advice. That's been a consistent sort of message for practitioners that work in elite sport, rather, like you said, not aimlessly just sort of learning things, but it's very deliberate and purposeful learning that you can apply to better your work at the club for the athletes.
Yeah.
You mentioned listening. Is that something that, apart from concentrating and focusing on it when you're listening to a podcast, is that something that you've worked on in terms of how to absorb information, whether it be reporting or journaling or like talk us, or is it maybe teaching to other practitioners? How do you make the most of that information when you're trying to get better at a specific part of your craft?
I think I'm actually quite lucky that I can, when I listen, so if I'm at the gym or walking a dog or something along those lines, quite relaxed, that's when I listen to most podcasts. And they're not all clinical. I just like listening to different sports people about leadership or whatever it might be. And so I don't really write a hell of a lot down most of the time, because in a way it's a bit nerdy, but it could be my relaxing time. So, but I've got, I suppose, an ability to remember quite a bit from those. So then if I, want to look up a particular article or a stat or whatever it might be, I'll think to go and do that when I get home.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I go about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then for the athletes that are listening in, what are some things that you've noticed that top end athletes do really well? It doesn't have to be from a physical point of view or injury prevention point of view, but when you're working with a new athlete, do you get a sense of like, oh, this guy or this girl has got what it takes to be a high performer?
Definitely. And something that I've probably learnt and evolved over the years, sort of working, 15 years now, sounding old in sport, and probably the last 10 close to full time, is that they've got to be self-driven or find a way to be self-driven. And that might take a few years in the system of pro sport for an athlete to figure out how to go about that, because it is different to everyone. So I've seen it when, people come in and they are going to tag the best player and they'll try and do everything that the best player at the club does, but that best player has been in the system for 8 years and can physically take it. And then this poor young kid gets injured all the time.
Yeah.
So I think it's having that drive to find out what works best for them and not for someone else is probably what sets the best athletes apart. And it's not just simply hard work. Hard work's a given, but it's experimenting. You got to learn what's good sore and what's bad sore. You got to learn what recovery works best for you, what diet works best for you. And it's our job as practitioners, whether it be physio, S&C, nutrition, psychology, coaching, etc. I think the athletes that kind of get information from all of those people and then work out what works best for them ends up making them the best athlete. So, for example, that might be some people hate ice baths. So even though science might say you should do an ice bath at this time and you should do hot, cold at that time, if they've experimented with what works best for them, then I'm all for them doing what they want to do. But where that can get a bit grey and where I think it doesn't work could be someone gets a bit lazy and they just hate doing ice baths because they're lazy. Yeah. And so they do nothing. So that's not the answer, and you can't confuse those two tracks, I suppose. You have to find what works for you and then don't be lazy.
Yeah, and it's even if thinking from an athlete's point of view, as a young athlete, that it can be potentially a tough one, can't it? Because ice baths are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But if you feel amazing from it and it allows you to prepare better and train well the next day, then you sort of need to go through that uncomfort for the performance benefit. That's what. Whereas if you don't get the benefit, don't just go through keep doing the same thing.
Spot on. But find something that works for you. Yeah. So if you don't like ice baths because they're uncomfortable versus you don't like them because they make you feel worse, then what makes you feel better? And if that's sitting on a bike, or if it's compression garments, or, we've got so many things in the research that are 1%ers. They're probably the big rocks for everyone, or how I think about it, are sleep and nutrition. That you have to get those right, and then you can experiment a little bit with the other things.
And now's a good time to experiment in the off season, because there's no games going around, and even going in, you can start to play around with what works now, and then apply that to your practice match campaign. How often would you recommend a development athlete to try something and then reflect on it and recognize, okay, that's not, I'm going to bin that one and I'm going to move on to the next one? Is it 3 times? Is there a certain number, or is another one of those ones that's sort of, once you get it a couple of goes and then go off your gut feeling?
Yeah, I think your gut feeling will tell you quite a bit, but probably the main thing with that is you only try one thing new at a time. So don't try ice baths and a bike ride, because if you get worse, you don't know which one does or makes you worse. So if you're nailing your sleep and you're nailing your nutrition, and then you want to add other things in or take them out, just do one at a time. So, right, this works for me, or this doesn't work for me. And once you know it does or doesn't, then maybe you can try something extra.
And then from a rehab point of view, what are some common mistakes that you've seen in the clinic and also in the sporting setting, that developing athletes and also practitioners, I guess, can learn from?
I think if I just put my purely physio hat on now, rather than working in sport, I think generally speaking, as a rule, and this is a bit of a blanket statement, and I don't want to offend anyone here, but certainly over the years, and I'm guilty of it as well as physios, we probably underload people. It's because we're scared of them getting sore. Where realistically the research is definitely moving, towards to be making people robust. You have to do the work. So part of doing the work is actually getting in the gym and doing the work. So what I mean by that is, traditionally physios have been teased about giving 3 sets of 10 for everything in the world. And that's probably a fair enough criticism. So I think not getting into that habit of giving generics, and going down, if you want strength, then you need to set strength parameters, and it needs to be hard, and you need to find a way to explain that to the athlete or to the person in the clinic or whoever it might be, even if they're little old ladies or little old men. Your end goal might be different, but if you're trying to get them stronger, you need to overload that muscle, and that's very basic. But I think that's probably something where I've gone wrong myself in the early days, and when we give second opinions and whatnot now, that's probably a common theme that comes through. And as you get a bit more experience, you can get more expertise, I suppose, in learning how to overload one area without making the injured area sore, whether that's simply changing range or changing the exercise or the technique or whatever it might be. But I reckon that's probably the main summary to answer your question.
It does take an experienced practitioner and an athlete that has good body awareness to get that balance right, isn't it? Because if you go from being so conservative for quite some time to now thinking, oh, I've got to be resilient and build strength, to then going the other end of the spectrum, then you get injured, and that was your experience. You're like, oh, that injured me going to, working too hard. When really it's a process. And
it's a gradual process of building up to be able to be robust enough to take that load.
Yeah. And like when working with an athlete and building that buy-in, what are some important strategies to do from a relationship point of view and almost from an education point of view when working with athletes for the first time?
Well, I think that the first thing, which is again really basic, but you have to be able to do it yourself. So if we use a clinic example, if you're in the gym showing or demonstrating exercises, only demonstrate what you can do and do well, and what you think they can do and do well, because otherwise that's not going to work. And then if you put your elite sport hat on. If you're working in rehab, something that I love doing, and it kills two birds with one stone in a way, is it gets your exercise done if you're running with them or doing an off-leg session with them. It builds that rapport that, this guy's not afraid of working hard with me, and I know that this is really bad, I'm injured and I'm in rehab and I'm trying to get reconditioned, but at least I've got someone here doing it with me, and it's hard, but I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that and shared that insight of what goes on at the elite level, because it it is a simple one, but it does mean so much to someone. Like at the end of the day, rehab is probably one of the darkest places an athlete can be in when they're
Yeah.
isolated from the group. So by having that support, even if there's no communication done, it's just someone sweating next to you and working just as hard with you,
Yep.
does go a long way to, from a mental point of view, to feel like that person really cares. Like you talked about the importance of caring for those that you work with.
Yep.
How often would you tap into that throughout a rehab process? Is that something that happens on a weekly basis, or is it just sort of, and then when do you make the decision on, I'm going to dive in today and jump in with them?
Well, I try and do it every day, but I'm now 35 years old with two kids, doesn't sleep much, so sometimes I get a bit sore trying to keep up with elite athletes.
Building resilience.
Yeah, I need to get more resilient. So I guess as a rule, I will try and do some of the session with them every day.
That's amazing.
And then if I'm too sore, then I won't. And it depends at what level of rehab they're at. So like at AFL level, these guys that I'm working with now, I can't keep up with them every rep, for example. But then it might be
session or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So it might be then you're being a bit of a rabbit for them to catch, and you're starting halfway ahead in a rep, or you're doing every second rep, or whatever it might be. Whereas at hockey, when I was working with the girls, that might be a bit different because I can keep up for a bit longer with them. So it's more than just giving them someone to run with through that really grind. If they're doing a 6 or 7K session, that, I might do 5Ks with them and none of the speed or agility or something like that. So that it's a bit different, but in short, depends on how my body feels, but as a rule, try and do as much as I can with them.
No, that's awesome, mate. I love that you share that, and you've got that aspect in your armory. It's a good tool for a practitioner to have. And did you see, like, I know for me, I started doing that when I saw someone else do it, and I saw it be successful. And from, like you said, from that relationship and rapport point of view, I saw how effective it was. So I stole that from another practitioner. But is that something that just sort of came naturally to you? You've always done it because
I haven't. So when I was working in the waffle, it didn't have time to do it because there's 60 guys on a list. So sort of through training, you're often inside assessing injuries. When I started working in the AFL at Melbourne, was Daniel Cross was there. And so he used to play for the Bulldogs, and he finished his last couple of years at Melbourne. And probably to this day, he'd still be the best runner, or, be in the top 5 runners on any AFL list. So, he was just a great runner. So I'd watch him and he would lead them rather than. And so, when I kind of started to do more rehab in my role there, I'd join in as well.
Yeah. And let's go back to the career journey. So going from spending one day a week at West Coast doing your post-grad and working at East Fremantle, how did that eventuate then was Melbourne the next career progression from there? Yeah,
so I had decided really then, like I said, when I got back from England, I wanted to go down the elite sport pathway. I grew up in Perth, and in Perth, there's only 2 AFL teams. There's 1 soccer team and 1 cricket team. So there were probably only 6 or 7 full-time jobs in sport in Perth. Hockey is based here as well, which I ended up coming back to, but all of those organisations had been really stable for a long period of time. And At West Coast, my mate Steve Gravina, who you interviewed a little while ago on your show, he got a job a year or so before. And so I'd kind of looked at the Eagles for one and thought, well, I'm not going to get in there. And then similar with all the other organisations around Perth. So I thought, I'm going to move to Melbourne and work in a private practice, and or Sydney. I wasn't too fussed.
Yep.
But just do something different. I was at that stage in my life where I could do that. I'd just met my now wife, but that was, sort of 8 years ago, but we could move around pretty freely.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd made that decision to move to Melbourne, and I'd emailed the head of the AFL Physio Association, who was Gary Nichols at the time. And I just said, and I had those contacts through the Eagles, and I said, I'm looking to move to Melbourne. If there are any jobs at any club, let me know, but I'm going to move anyway. And then just by chance, literally probably half an hour later, I got a generic email back to all of the AFL Physio Association from Gary saying that he was retiring from the head physio role at Melbourne Footy Club.
Oh, right.
And it just then so happened that I was really lucky that who I did my postgrad with was Sam Peach, who I mentioned earlier. And he was kind of second physio at the D's, and he moved up into the head physio role. So I did an interview there, and then was lucky enough to get the job. So it all fell into place.
No good to that.
You couldn't have planned it any better, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I moved over to Melbourne. The job started part-time, which was 30 hours a week. And I really struggled sort of to get a job in a private practice over there, because it's quite easy if you're established and you've got a caseload and you cut back from 40 hours a week to 30 or 40 hours a week to 10, that's okay. You can do that quite easily. But when you're going over there and starting somewhere new, and it's no fault of any of the clinics that I was chatting to, they were sort of like, well, can you do every Thursday 12 till 7 or whatever? And I'd be like, oh, no, I can't do this Thursday because training's then, or we're flying to Brisbane for a camp here. It just ended up, however we tried to do it, despite people really trying to look after me, it was just too varied hours in footy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when then I just got in touch with La Trobe Uni and marked their postgrad assignments that I'd only finished a couple of years earlier. So I kind of supplemented my income from being part-time at the D's with a job that I could do at home, or I didn't have to rock up at a certain time.
Yeah.
So I did that for a year, and then after that, in my second year at the D's, it became full-time anyway. And probably like most people realise, 30 hours a week means 40.
Yeah.
So it kind of just evolved very quickly into a full-time role.
Yep. And what were your major learnings and challenges in your first that full-time role in elite sport?
Yeah, it was great. I loved my time at the D's, and I was there from 2014 to 19. So for those keen historians or D's fans out there that have come out of the woodwork since they won it this year, that was the Roosie period, where it was, when I started there, we'd won 2 games, and then won 4 games, and then won 7 games, and then won 12 games, I think it was, and then won 16 games in a prelim final. So those first 4 years or so were fun, just rising up year by year, linear improvement, everything going really well. That's pretty well documented. We got smashed, ironically, by the Eagles in the prelim final when they went on to win the premiership. We were just, the bodies were cooked by how much of an effort that took for a relatively young group. And looking back in hindsight, they probably overachieved in that year with all those young guys who, 3 years on went and won a premiership, but it probably stood them in good stead to know how hard it was. And then 2019, really fell away, and that was no fun working in an organisation. Then that's losing every week. Pre-season we were meant to be flag favourites based on the year before, big expectations, and then things just really went downhill, and it just wasn't a fun environment to work in that 2019 year.
Yeah, I can imagine. And throughout the pre-season, did it feel like it was a successful campaign and the boys did well over the off-season and everything looked pretty good come round one?
In that 2019 year?
Yeah.
We probably didn't. I mean, obviously we knew there was a lot of off-season surgery, and so it was going to be difficult to be up and going early in the year based on how interrupted a lot of guys' pre-seasons were. Okay. But probably didn't realise the extent of how difficult it was going to be of starting from such a low base.
Yeah. And then you mentioned the players were burnt out. So was there almost like, because there was a linear progression of success in a young group, do you think after a while there's just a point where you do need to sort of taper back?
It's a great question, and that it's probably a psychologist might be able to answer that a bit better, because there's clearly a physical side to that linear progression, but the mental side of it as well, and just how tough elite sport is, what caused them to have the wheels fall off. Not sure, really. And it might just be that maybe they overachieved a bit in 2018 and then underachieved a bit in 2019. And then really they were always going to start to be good around this time. So it'll be interesting to see how they go.
Journey.
Yeah, it's just part of the journey. And it had all been linear since 2014. And then there's a few sort of bumps in the road in that middle period. And it'd be interesting to see how they go moving forward. They're a really mature group now that are, the reigning premiers.
Yeah, and they've gone through that hardship as well to, help improve that drive, or you imagine they're not going to get complacent because they've seen the dark times. So
that's right.
Yeah, scary next 5 years, eh?
Yeah, it might be.
What about from yourself personally over your career, when you look back, what has been some of the biggest challenges and as a practitioner working at the highest level, and what are some learnings that you've had from a personal point of view from those?
Yeah, I think that 2019 year was certainly very challenging, just based on the sheer number of injuries that we were kind of rehabbing at the end of 2018 and all the way through. That it just was hard, and sort of no matter how hard you worked, it felt like you were never getting your head above water, because then maybe a new injury would occur. So yeah, that was difficult, not just really from a work sense of the nitty-gritty hands-on work, but just, footy clubs aren't a good place to be around when you're losing every week. So that's probably the biggest overall challenge. And then there's been lots of clinical ones over time where, something's not getting better like you think it should, and learnings that I would, take from those. One is I can be quite hard on myself at times, and I think it's my fault. But just to learn that time sometimes is your best friend. It just needs a bit of healing. And then two, don't be embarrassed, might not be the right word, but don't be afraid to get help. Send them to a specialist in your field. So if it's physio, a specialist physio, or get a second opinion from a different surgeon, or chat to the doc a bit more, or just get help when you need it, and don't feel like you're always doing something wrong, because more often than not you're not doing anything wrong. You just, as you get a bit more experienced, probably now that I'm a few more years on, I'm more comfortable referring out to other practitioners when I feel things aren't following the path that they should.
Yeah, that's such a great advice, and it does take a bit of time to have that comfort within yourself to refer on, doesn't it? Because you sort of
and I think that comes from to be comfortable to refer on. You have to know that you're doing the right thing yourself. So I know early on you think, oh, I'm just going to send them to this person and they're going to think, well, what's this guy doing? He's got no idea.
Yeah.
So, and then as you start to learn a bit more, they're not going to say that for one.
Yeah.
But as you get a bit more experience, you know that you do the right thing most of the time, and you just might need a little tweak or a little different idea here and there.
And what about from the player's point of view? Like when you say, hey, when you sit them down and say, look, I just want to get a second opinion. Has a player ever questioned you on why do you need that second opinion, or do they just see that as you're actually doing the best by them because you're getting more people's brains into the program, you're getting more people's experience into the program, so it's always been a positive response? Has there ever been a one where there's a challenge towards it?
No, always positive, and it's probably the way that you explain it to the player, and it is genuinely around that of, I think we're on the right track, mate, but I just want to get a second set of eyes over it. We see you every day. So sometimes having someone else, no history, just sit down, have a chat with you, spend an hour, get a second set of eyes over it. So that's the way that I would explain it to the athlete. And not that I've ever thought this, but if I said to the athlete, look, I've got no idea what's going on here. You need to go see someone else because I'm incompetent, you'd probably get a different response.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I think I've never really felt that to that extent by any stretch. I've always been, I suppose, quite confident in what I'm doing, but not arrogant. So more than happy to get help, and I love getting second opinions, but by the same token, back my skills as well.
Yeah, and we talked about challenges over your career. What about highlights and moments in your career that you look back fondly and proud of?
Yeah, well, highlight of career, definitely the Olympics. Really lucky to get a job with Hockey Australia just as the Olympics, or just before, really, they were postponed. I probably wouldn't have gone if they weren't postponed, based on being new in the role. And then, with the COVID lockdown, everyone was kind of stuck in Perth, so no one else could work with them. It was great. Just as a sports fan, like I said, right from the start, to be going to an Olympic Games and be in the village and get all the uniform, you're treated like a rock star, charter flights and food halls and opening ceremonies, all that kind of stuff was just the most unbelievable experience. And I highly recommend to anyone from any field in sport that at some stage of their career, if they can get to an Olympic Games, you certainly won't regret it. That was just an outstanding experience, and probably on a more personal level of pride there. I mentioned Dave Valley before. He was the S&C coach, and we'd had one of our better players that had missed most of the year with groin pain, and we had to work really, really hard to get her physically able to cope with playing up to 8 games in 2 weeks. And she ended up being arguably the best player, certainly in the top few. So that was a highlight when you look back and you, from a more personal level, and you think, maybe I do know what I'm doing here. If we can get someone who in January couldn't roll out of bed without pain to be able to play back-to-back games at an Olympic level and perform, was a real highlight. So I loved my time there at hockey. And a more team level as well. The 2018 season with Melbourne was great, which was, I mentioned how we were linear progression. That was probably jumped up a little bit more than linear, but that was just so much fun when you're winning games when you weren't meant to. Not that I was playing, but to be part of it around the club, and we won a couple of finals. But those couple of things I think were highlights of my career.
Yeah, and on that, on the player that you managed with Dave, with the groin injury, I mean, that sounds like it's an impossible task. Groin injury, 8 games in 2 weeks. What did you guys do, and how did you manage that with the athlete?
Well, we initially sat down, just Dave and I, and looked at what she would have to do. So he's a bit of a genius in the sports science sense with lot of data on her games and her games against different opposition, and he had it all mapped out of what she would need to do.
Yep.
So we kind of worked backwards. We looked at what are the Olympic Games going to look like for her, and in January she couldn't roll to get out of bed. Her groin was that sore, and she was the type of person as well, had never been injured before, so she was very poor with reporting, and she'd been sore for a couple of months before even reporting anything to us at all. So, and she'd been a bit naughty really. She'd managed with anti-inflammatories, so whenever there was any kind of screening going on, she felt okay. So she was that type of personality, which kind of makes her really good as well. So you don't never want to beat that out of the athlete, because she never wanted to miss anything. We had to see what she needed to be able to get to, and then we had to work back literally day by day from there, and thinking, time's getting tight, and make the numbers kind of work to get her exposed enough to not just be able to play, but perform. So we'd had a tour to New Zealand in late May, it was. And that was kind of the mark where if she wasn't being able to play by then, she probably wasn't going to be on track to make it. So we kind of set ourselves little goals along the way that if she's not hitting markers, that then, it started to look pretty dire. And so we explained that to her as well. She was really interested in, all of our little graphs and data and whatnot. So, we went down that path of small goals, and then we had that bigger goal in mind. And she got to play in the New Zealand games, and that showed us then that she was going to be physically capable. But often with those long-term injuries, the player themselves, when they get out there on the field, she said, I felt like I've never played hockey before. I was so far off the level. So I'm glad that we went down that path, because she then had basically May, or part of May, and then June and most of July to just train unrestricted. So if you put that in a footy sense, that's basically a full pre-season, 3 months of training. So it worked out perfectly, and caused us a few sleepless nights, but it certainly worked out perfectly in the end.
Yeah, no, well played. That's awesome. And great to hear, physios and S&Cs with sports science working, collaboratively with the athlete. That's a great story. Thanks, mate. Thanks for sharing.
No worries.
We'll go on to the lighter side of the podcast, mate. This is a bit of a get to know you from a personal side. So the first one is, which movie or TV series has impacted you the most, and why?
Not sure anything particularly impacted. I'm a bit of a documentary nerd, so I don't watch a lot of series, I suppose. But I watch a lot of medical docos, which is pretty nerdy, really.
What's one that stands out?
I think it's called An Hour to Save Your Life, which is it puts what we do into perspective, where it follows the elite paramedics and emergency doctors in London, really, in a helicopter, and they're literally doing open heart surgery on the side of the road to save people's lives. So that kind of makes you think, someone's got a sore hammy or a sore groin, you're not too fussed by it. But probably Cool Runnings. Cool Runnings is a great movie. That's my favourite movie.
Yep. And what about favourite inspirational quote or life motto?
Probably not inspirational, but I kind of always say, if you don't like it, do something else. So kind of got to that in my time at Melbourne, actually, where if I listened to people complaining about training's hard, or it's too hot out there, I'd say, well, mate, if you don't like it, do something else. Like, you're playing AFL footy, how good's this? And then I probably then started to realise myself that if I was complaining about something, then if I don't like it, do something else. So I think it's a good motto. You can use it in a sense of to put someone in their place. But if you actually think about what it means, you should probably live like that as well. And so, yeah, if you're really not enjoying something, get a different job or find something that you like and use it in a positive way.
Yeah, or even from your perspective, if you can just shift your perspective on that task,
That's right.
Bring some energy into the warm up or try and feed
Yep.
off another player, and the task hasn't changed, but your perspective has, and now you're having fun, or like you said with the recovery, just find what works.
Yep.
I like that. In your work life, on the flip side of that one, in your work life, what makes you angry? What are your pet peeves?
Scissors go missing.
Just go missing.
Yeah, wherever I've worked.
Yeah.
You go to cut tape off and players taking them to the change room, whatever it might be, scissors go. And I've never seen that different anywhere, at any clinic or any sporting organisation.
Yeah, it's like mini bands and lacrosse balls in gyms.
Yeah, same type of thing.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Where do they go? What's your favourite way to spend your day off?
It's changed a bit now that I've got two little ones. So now it's spending time with the family. Yep. Probably prior to that, it would have been wake up, do some exercise on a Sunday, for example, go for a swim at the beach, and then a nice brunch with a newspaper would be the way to go. But yeah, now spending time with the wife and kids is lots of fun.
Yeah. How old are the young ones?
Got a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old.
Oh wow! So, yeah, nice.
Pretty hectic.
Yeah. My guy's Jackson. He's nearly 3. Yeah, 2.
Oh, right.
It's a fun age.
Great age. Yeah. They're lots of fun.
They start getting pretty independent, don't
They
they?
do.
In a COVID-free world, what would be your favourite holiday destination and why?
I reckon Nice and Dubrovnik in Croatia. So they're both similar in a way. I don't know if you've been there, but right on the beach, beautiful old European towns. Loved them.
Yeah. Okay. Beautiful. Yeah. Nice. When did you go there? Was that when you went?
Yeah, sort of 2010, 11 kind of period. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing your journey and your story with us, mate. And it's been massively valuable for myself, and I know that the athletes, strength and conditioning coaches and physios that have tuned in will get a lot out of it. What's on the horizon for you for 2021? I know you mentioned there's a workshop up and coming with yourself and Chris. Do you want to explain that, and then any other things that you're excited about for the rest of the year?
Yeah, so we'll just give a quick plug. We've got it's called the Athletic Hip and Groin that Chris Perkin and myself are running through the West Coast Health and High Performance Clinic. It's in Perth on the 4th and 5th of December. So yeah, anyone that is quarantine free from anywhere else all around the world listening, we'd love to have you. We've got some really great presenters speaking. You can check it out on the website at westcoasthealth.com.au. From various fields, we've got radiologists, sports doc, Ben Ray Smith, who I mentioned before, Jake Lalich, who's more of a movement style practitioner that does a lot of similar stuff to Steve Gravina that you mentioned before. Just trying to give physios, S&C, anyone out there that works with people with hip and groin pain, lots of different perspectives on how we deal with it. So yeah, Chris and I are kind of running that course. And then, going forward, I've only been here at the Eagles for a couple of weeks now, and we're just kind of right in planning pre-season. And then, really looking forward to getting stuck into the full-time role at the Eagles.
Yeah, awesome, mate. It's congratulations getting into the Eagles. It's a great journey that you've been on all around the world, and then go over to, rolling the dice, going to Melbourne, realising that it was so competitive and stable in Perth in elite sport, and it's all paid off, mate. You're now back at the Eagles and working there full time. So it's an inspiring story, and thank you for sharing it with us tonight.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Awesome, and thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope you got a lot out of that episode. I know I did, and make sure to take notes. And if you have any questions, hit us up on Instagram. And we will also post the show notes for that hip and groin workshop, so you can join Chris Perkin and Steve. And that's coming up in a couple of weeks as well, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah, December 4 and 5.
December 4 and 5. Yeah, so get in your spot. I know off air, Steve mentioned it is limited spot, so make sure to book in through the website, and I'll post that in the show notes. Our next live guest on the podcast will be Josh Grouden. He's the head coach, founder of Kicking Consultant, and we'll be doing his live interview on our YouTube channel at 8:30 p.m. this Thursday. So until then, guys, I'll speak to you on the next episode. Cheers.